Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, sisters and brothers, friends and comrades. Welcome. I am Don Rojas, Director of Communications and International Relations for the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and for the National African American Reparations Commission. Many of us here this evening were present at the historic National International Reparations Summit held at York College in New York City 7 years ago this month, when some 200 delegates from 22 countries came together to talk about the necessity for slavery reparations in the 21st century. We cherish the memories of that event, some of which you would have seen in the opening video. It was indeed a seminal gathering, which represented a unique moment for learning, sharing, and bonding among reparations advocates and activists from 4 continents. At the 2015 summit, the National African American Reparations Commission, NAARC, was launched. It was inspired by the formation of the CARICOM Reparations Commission less than 2 years before at a CARICOM Heads of Government Summit in Trinidad and Tobago in July of 2013. Shortly after the New York summit, NAARC released its 10-point plan, which was modeled after CARICOM's own 10-point action agenda. And over the past 7 years, NAARC and the CRC have collaborated on a range of reparations initiatives. It is fair to say that both entities have developed a powerful synergistic partnership over this period. One of the highlights of the New York conference in 2015 was a dynamic dialogue between members of both commissions, a conversation that was facilitated by Dr. Ron Daniels, convener of NAARC, and Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Tonight, we come together once again to memorialize the New York summit and to continue that dialogue by sharing reports on the state of the reparations movements in the Caribbean and the United States, and to exchange perspectives on how best to expand and strengthen the global reparations movement that emerged out of the 2015 summit. Among those who participated actively in that 2015 summit was Dr. Hilary Brown, Program Officer at the CARICOM Secretariat in Georgetown, Guyana, and manager of the Secretariat's reparations portfolio. Dr. Brown, over to you. Dr. Brown, you're on mute. You need to unmute.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Don. It really is such a pleasure and privilege for me to join in giving a warm welcome on behalf of CARICOM to everyone gathered for this very important conversation, what we have deemed a virtual dialogue, and recognizing in particular Dr. Ron Daniels, convener of NAARC, and all the NAARC commissioners, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, chairman of the CRC, and all the CARICOM Reparations Commissioners, as well as all our specially invited guests. And I would really like to congratulate Dr. Daniels and his team for bringing us back together to mark the 7th anniversary of that game-changing International Reparations Summit held in New York. I also have very cherished memories of that engagement, and I was smiling as I looked at all the images and really remembered, the excellent time that we had. And so what we're observing tonight is not only the 7th anniversary of the summit and the 7th anniversary of the launch of NAARC, but also importantly, we're celebrating the 7th anniversary of that very strong collaboration between the CRC and the NAARC, which you have alluded to, Don. I will never forget at that summit, that very rousing and inspiring opening and closing rallies at the Mother AME Zion Church in Harlem, New York. It was an amazing experience. And at the opening, Reverend Jesse Jackson's address, and at the closing, Professor Beckles' address, as well as the very moving tribute we had to Congressman John Conyers, at which Danny Glover gave the keynote address. Really, it was a powerful time. And of course, the vibrant exchanges and conversations that we had at York College City University of New York, where we pledged to move this reparations movement forward. And I think in many ways we have done just that. 7 years later, NAARC has more than moved the needle on HR 40, the reparations study bill, and has advanced a number of impactful initiatives that we will hear more about in the course of this evening. And the CRC has been very successful in re-energizing the global movement for reparations and driving the discourse, putting the spotlight on the issue, and helping to push the global reckoning that we have been seeing in academia, private corporations, and by governments. And we really owe a debt of gratitude to our chair, Professor Beckles, for being such a fearless advocate and champion, and really inspiring all of us to speak up and to be counted. However, there are a number of areas that we recognize need more advocacy and better coordination among us to move them forward. And we will discuss some of them this evening. And I think that includes a much stronger alliance between Africa and us here in the Americas diaspora to advance the agenda. We actually discussed this at the 2015 summit, and we have made some progress, but we know there's a lot more work to be done. There are pockets of initiatives all across Africa, in Kenya, Ghana, South Africa, and we have been reaching out across the Atlantic to each other. I invited some of the ADO Network kings and queens here tonight, and if they're on, welcome. I know it will be very late where you are in Africa. And now we have the UN Permanent Forum of People of African Descent, which is a critical avenue for advancing our agenda in the United Nations. And we welcome Michael McEachran, who is now one of the representatives on that commission. And of course, we need to push for a second international decade for people of African descent. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of possibilities. And what I would say in closing is that the International Reparations Summit in 2015 left us on a high. It left us full of commitment and fervor towards advancing the reparations agenda. And so what I'm looking forward to this evening through this dialogue is to once again inspiring each other to a new level of cooperation, a new level of commitment, and a renewed agenda for collaborative action. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Now over to you, Dr. Daniels.
Thank you very much. And again, we appreciate so much, Dr. Hillary Brown, your participation. We now want to share some solidarity statements, and we have two, or actually have four, but we want to recognize some of our distinguished political leaders. So even though she could not be here, we want to read a statement from the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee. The Congresswoman says that I regret that my congressional responsibilities prevent me from joining you in person in this evening to mark the anniversary of the historic International Summit on Reparations convened in New York in 2015. My esteemed leader and mentor, the Honorable John Conyers, attended this amazing gathering. I'm delighted to join in commending the extraordinary work of the National African American Reparations Commission and the CARICOM Reparations Commission at a moment that we cannot wait for in terms of reparatory justice, or to make reparatory justice a reality. I deeply appreciate the support shown by Professor Beckles and the CARICOM Reparations Commission in moving HR 40, the bill to create a federal commission to study and develop reparations proposals for African Americans, forward. We are on the brink of a historic victory. Please advise my distinguished sister, the Honorable Maya Motley, the first woman Prime Minister of Barbados, that I look forward to working with her to facilitate a strong working relationship with the Congressional Black Caucus as we work together to engage governmental leaders in the global reparations movement. That is from the Honorable Sheila Jackson Lee. I now think David Commission has a statement from the Honorable Maya Motley.
You guys need to start my video.
you just take off your.
Okay. No, thank you. Thank you, Brother Ron Daniels. Good evening, good morning, good night, good day, wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure for me to be here. I can't claim to be bringing a direct message on behalf of Prime Minister Mia Amor Motley of Barbados, but as Barbados's ambassador to the Caribbean community, and in light of the fact that it is Barbados that has lead responsibility for reparations within the Caribbean community, and it is Prime Minister Motley who chairs the CARICOM Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations, it gives me great pleasure to be able to add something to this event. Prime Minister Motley, in all likelihood, right now is hosting a congressional delegation of the United States Congress, headed by Congresswoman Barbara Lee. So Prime Minister Motley has been very, very busy. Over the last 2 days, she has hosted another congressional delegation led by Congresswoman Maxine Waters in her capacity as chair of the House Committee on Financial Services. And the issues that Prime Minister Motley has been discussing with these US congressional delegations are issues directly pertinent to reparations. I would say that Prime Minister Motley has broken new ground in the reparations campaign in her capacity as chair of the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee on Reparations, in that she has emphasized the need for a reparative restructuring of the currently existing international economic and political order. She is very clear that the case that Walter Rodney made when he wrote the book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and the case that Sir Hilary Beckles has recently made when he published the book, How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean, the idea that Europe's development was purchased at the price of the looting and plundering and underdevelopment of the African continent and the Caribbean region, that analysis is extremely accurate. And she has gone on to make the point that as Europe plundered us, developed its industrial economy, that industrial economy has gone on to significantly damage the environment of the world, has generated the greenhouse gases that has produced the climate crisis that is now impacting Caribbean countries and African countries. The Caribbean countries are on the front line of the climate crisis. So these wealthy white industrial economies plunder us, develop this industrial economy that has now inflicted additional punishment on us in terms of the loss and damage that we are experiencing. And then they say they have no responsibility for compensating us for the loss and damage. So Prime Minister Motley is targeting all of that. We are saying that reparations is an extremely powerful weapon to wield in the fight for the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to wield against the blacklisting that Europe and the OECD countries have imposed on vulnerable Caribbean countries, to wield in the battle to reform and restructure the IMF, the World Bank, the UN Security Council, the UN itself, to restructure the international terms of trade, to insist that countries and people that were subjected to centuries of plunder and looting now possess a fundamental right to development And these wealthy and powerful countries that develop their wealth and power at the expense and on the basis of the looting and plunder of the Black and brown peoples of this world are now under a fundamental duty to facilitate that development. So Prime Minister Motley is on the verge of sending out a second round of letters to 9 Western European countries, to the heads of government, saying to them that a debt is owed and that they need to sit with CARICOM and negotiate compensation, reparatory justice compensation for that debt that is owed. She's also pushing this notion that CARICOM must reach out to the African continent. We have invited Africa to partner with us on this reparations journey. She has said that we must make our reparations campaign into a mass movement. Under her leadership, the Prime Ministerial Subcommittee has directed the CARICOM Reparations Commission to bring more representatives of the Rastafari movement into the CRC, more representatives of the indigenous people into the CRC. National committees have been instructed to open up to more youth and more representatives of the artistic community. So, brothers and sisters, reparations is an idea whose time has come. I think that we are on the verge of some very, very historic achievements. And I just want to end by casting my mind back to that April in 2015. In fact, perhaps I would not be here speaking on behalf of Prime Minister Motley were it not for that event. I'm sure Sir Hilary Beckles will remember as we walked together through the streets of Brooklyn, and we spoke about, what is the next step for David Comishong, and Sir Hilary was very clear that I needed to join forces with Mia Motley and be part of that new administration to take forward our people's struggles. So Ron Daniel, perhaps were it not for that historic conference, that great conference, and I'm amazed by the images this evening, because it reminds me just how international a conference it was. Perhaps were it not for that conference, I might not be here today making this speech. So thank you, Ron Daniels. We look forward to the Caribbean, working hand in hand with our brothers and sisters in the United States of America, in other parts of the African diaspora, our brothers and sisters on the African continent, to make this truly an international mass movement that cannot be denied. Thank you very much.
Right. We also have statements coming from, excuse me, 2 other invited guests, one of whom was definitely with us. And I will caution you these are brief statements as we want to move the program forward. And we have 2 representatives. And we'll start with Professor Chris is Manajapra. I hope I pronounced that right. If not, you'll correct me. He is a professor at Tufts University and has just recently published a book called Black Ghost of Empires. You now have the floor for your 2 minutes. Is he there? Oh, he's saying he does not sure he has access. Okay. While we're sorting that out, one of the persons I really remember playing a great role in the conference and having just an incredible series of conversations with. In fact, he kept me up all night, all negotiating and mediating. We had such a wonderful time. David McEachran, who is with the European Network of People of African Descent. If I mispronounce your name, the last name, Michael, please forgive me, but it is just due to my ancient age. But anyway, you now have the floor, sir, for 2 minutes.
Dr. Daniels, Thank you for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. I'm on this call from Tobago, and it's a great honor to be here with you all. So good evening, or yes, good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world at this moment. So yes. The work of the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the National African American Reparations Commission, I see as at the forefront of a global movement for reparatory and decolonial justice. And I would say that we need a third wave of decolonization in the world today, both at the international level, as Ambassador Commission mentioned, the restructuring of the international economic order, among other things, and the restructuring of the UN system itself for it to be more equitable and democratic. So we need a third decolonial movement at the international level as well as at the domestic levels. And I very much see the CARICOM Reparations Commission and the work of the CRC and the work of NAARC as being at the forefront of this movement. So I am based in Europe, and so I'm in the belly of the beast, so to speak. And of course, Europe is in complete denial about the histories and continuing legacies of enslavement, of native genocide, of the systemic racial discrimination of European colonialism there's no singular historical event that has been more transformative to our world, and yet Europe continues to deny the relevance of these histories and the need to properly address them, including the need to address the systemic racial discrimination, which is a reality across Europe, and not only in Europe, where people of color consistently are the most discriminated against across any area of society, but also Europe's continuing colonial, if you will, relationship to the rest of the world, and not only Europe's continuing relationship to the rest of the world, but the so-called developed countries and their relationship to the rest of the world. And as we all know, the so-called developed world is either European countries or former so-called European settler colonies. So yes, so the CRC and the work of the CRC and the work of NAARC is very much at the forefront of creating a global movement to dismantle, if you will, the continuing legacies of colonialism. And I'm very glad and honored to make any small contribution I can to this great and critical endeavor.
Don.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sisters and brothers, it is my singular pleasure and honor to introduce the co-moderators for this evening's virtual dialogue, two giants of the global reparations movement with much in common. Both are men of high distinction, held in esteem by people around the world, two stalwarts in the liberation struggle for people of African descent across the globe, two trailblazers charting new social and political frontiers for our people. Both are visionary leaders operating on the cutting edge of progressive social and economic change, and both understand the centrality of slavery reparations to Pan-Africanism and Black liberation in the 21st century. To cite the amazing academic and professional accomplishments of Professor Sir Hilary Beckles would literally take us the entire evening. Suffice it to say, since its formation by the CARICOM leaders in 2013, Sir Hilary has served as chairman of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, while also functioning as the vice chancellor of the University of the West Indies. He is a prolific author, a brilliant orator, successful academic administrator, and considered by many of us to be the Caribbean's preeminent public intellectual. He has recently published his umpteenth book, I believe the 17th or something, in that astronomical area. His new book is entitled How Britain Underdeveloped the Caribbean, and it has already become an instant classic. As a trained economic historian, Professor Beckles has taught us about the brutal nature of chattel slavery, in which kidnapped human beings from Africa were considered property, to be bought and sold, even to be mortgaged as economic assets. It was a particularly dehumanizing and traumatizing form of slavery, one which stripped the enslaved of all agency and resulted in the massive theft by extraction of economic value from the coerced labor of enslaved Africans on the plantations and in the mines in the Caribbean and across the Americas. He has argued that this massive theft provided the basis for the accumulation of capital which financed the industrial revolutions in both Europe and the United States. This debt has never been paid by the European slaveholding states, but it has resulted in the persistence of poverty, economic inequality, and disease across the Caribbean region. In his vision, reparations today is both a moral and a material imperative for sustainable development in the Caribbean region. Sir Hilary has also predicted that the struggle for reparatory justice will grow into the greatest political and human rights movement of the 21st century. As a veteran activist and master organizer, with the energy of others half his age, Dr. Ron Daniels, convener of the National African American Reparations Commission and president of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, teaches us that protracted struggle requires a keen understanding of strategy and tactics and the tenacity and perseverance of a long-distance runner. At 80 years old, and happy birthday, Brother Ron, he has a wealth of experience to share with us after spending decades in the trenches. His is an authoritative voice that carries weight in civil and human rights circles in the United States and around the world. His remarkable longevity is testimony to the depth of his commitment to the upliftment of people of African descent. It is also an inspiration to the younger generations of activists who he continues to mentor. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Ron Daniels.
Well, thank you very much, Don. I have to hire you as my agent. I've been missing out here on great opportunities. We really appreciate that, but let me just be clear that I really consider Professor Hilary Beckles our leader. He is the public intellectual who is guiding this work, who has taken it to an entirely different level. So whatever modest contribution I can make and will continue to make, I just want to make it clear that Professor Sir Hilary Beckles is just done phenomenal work in declaring that reparations will be the human rights struggle of the 21st century. So I think our task is to work in whatever ways we can in order to bring that about. Well, we're tasked to just to begin this conversation with our own reflections of what happened 7 years ago. So let me just say quickly that it was an amazing gathering. And it came at a time when the reparations movement that has its ebbs and flows. And we could argue that at the time that NAARC was born and this conference developed, we were in kind of a lull. Not because of any particular fault of our own, it's just the nature of how things flow in history. But we took note in these United States of America that in 2013, something interesting and significant happened. And it was that the leaders of the CARICOM nations, all 15 of them, and they come from different political backgrounds. And the reality is they were still dependent on the colonial powers. They had the guts and audacity to say, we are going to demand reparations for Native genocide, which was a principal position and a principal point, and African enslavement. We took note of that here in these United States of America. And in fact, some will recall that at the Congressional Black Caucus that year or shortly thereafter, where Congressman Conyers always convened us, I had the privilege for some 15 or 20 years to have been the facilitator of the reparations forums, reparations brain trust for Congressman Conyers. Dr. Malvo will recall, and others, that we turned, I don't know whether Nkechi Taif was present or not, we turned that session into a strategy session. We said, we think something is happening important in the Caribbean, and we can use this in order to give a jolt, to give an additional boost, if you will, to the reparations movement in the United States. And so we reached out and we said, we're going to try to have some forums across the country. Well, quite frankly, we didn't have the resources to do all that, but we did have some allies and friends in the great city of Chicago, which, you know, in certain seasons, it's worth visiting. You don't want to go in the winter because it's a little cold up there, but we had some great allies there. And working with Dr. Conrad World and Dr. Ivor Carruthers and Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste and a number of other people who came together at Chicago State University in Cobra with Cam Howard and others, we pulled together a phenomenal reparations town hall meeting. In fact, Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves was to attend, but he was not able to come. And it was perhaps fortuitous because we were then able to invite the guru, the person who actually was providing the intellectual framework that was charging up CARICOM to be present. And that was none other than Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. That town hall meeting raced across the world and was viewed by over 10,000 people all across the globe. We then knew that we were in a situation where we needed to begin to talk about how do we continue this movement. We in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century said, well, we don't know. We don't have the resources to convene anything or to move it forward. But we did arrange for some meetings to take place between Congressman Conyers and Dr. Ralph Gonsalves. And we had some additional kinds of meetings with the Congressional Black Caucus. I can't go through all of them. But it was an amazing synergistic relationship that was about to develop. And in a meeting at the Marriott Marquis, where Dr. Julius Garvey was present, after the Congressional Black Caucus session, we sat down and we were breaking bread together. And we posed the question to Professor Sir Hilary, would you be willing to bring the CARICOM Reparations Commission to the United States? And he said, yes. We said, oh, okay, well, we think this will be an important moment. Armed with that, question is, how do we do this? How are we going to pull this off? So I went to the board of directors of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. I said, there's an amazing opportunity here. We have said that we are not the organization that has the resources to sort of convene anything or to really gather up this energy, but it seems that it is falling on us to take this on as an initiative. And I'm asking, I said to the board, for you to charge and authorize me and Don Rojas to move forward with convening a national, international summit on reparations and to create and establish the National African American Reparations Commission. I am honored to say and proud to say that the word was yes. And I have to confess, we had no resources to do this. We put all of our chips in the middle of the table. We pushed them. We said, we're going to do this. We identified a site to do this. And we're going to put everything on the line, and we did. And And we pulled together this amazing summit that took place in New York on April 15th in 2015. And it was, as described, an incredible event. I mean, there are so many memories, I can't recall them all. But the bottom line is there were people who came from over 22 nations. We had to stop. We had to hold back. We said, we can't bring any more people. We just can't. But we went from city to from place to place, from York College to Harlem, to Brooklyn, to 1199. And at every place, everywhere we went, we asked the people to support us. We said, we have no resources. We did not have the resources to do this. And at every turn, people supported it. That event cost $45,000. And we were able to raise $42,000 from the people. And we were therefore able to almost cover it. We made an appeal after that, and we raised the rest of the money to move forward. But the bottom line is that it was an event that reverberated, not only in the United States of America, but it reverberated throughout the Caribbean and throughout the Pan-African world, and gave a jolt and a boost to the reparations movement. And we have been working synergistically, side by side, with the CARICOM Reparations Commission ever since. We support events in the Caribbean. They have sent representatives, including most recently to Evanston, Illinois, where Robin Ruth Simmons is led the charge to have reparations in that great city. We've had that kind of synergistic relationship, and we're profoundly thankful for it. And we agree with Michael that it is a cornerstone of a relationship that can indeed help to contribute to the development of a broader, stronger, and more vibrant global reparations movement. So those are my reflections. I am thrilled about it. I am filled with emotion about how far we've come, but we have a long way to go yet. And that's the subject of this conversation, is how do we move forward? So I now yield to the real leader of this struggle, Professor Sir Hilary Beckles, for his reflections before we actually then begin the overall conversation with our respective commissioners. Professor Beckles, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Kind comments, and of course, Don, who spoke so eloquently about what we are doing and where we have reached. And allow me to say this wrong in respect to the concept of leadership. I have a paradigm that guides my comprehension that the globalization of the enslavement of our people, wherever we were enslaved, there's a battle to be fought because of the legacy and the history. And from the villages of Africa to the towns and plantations and rural communities of the United States, to the islands of the Caribbean and Brazil, to the cities of Europe, wherever this crime was perpetrated, we will organize. And we have been organized, and we will continue to organize until we achieve our targets. And in all of these places, a complex network of persons will emerge and to do the work, because there's work to be done. So that's the leadership paradigm. There are thousands of us around who are doing what needs to be done. And we're all on a collective spiritual leadership program. We are doing what we can, we must, but hierarchies of leadership are inconsistent with our history and the work that we have to do. We are a networking people everywhere, following our spiritual calls based on our understanding of what needs to be done to rehabilitate and liberate our people. Working with you, Ron, has been a tremendous honor and a pleasure. And I know this to be a natural process because we in the Caribbean and our history, our colleagues in the United States, we've always had a sense of one cause. There has never been causes. There has always been one history. one people, one history. If you are on a plantation in Jamaica and Mississippi, Alabama, we're one people, one cause. And our history has bound us together so that 15 years ago, yes, when we were looking at this matter to go forward in the region, when the heads of governments met, and we were able to speak with them as prime ministers of the region, we told them about our brothers and sisters in North America. We were inspired by the long history of the American struggle, the long history of the American reparations movement, the history of Marcus Garvey across the world. I mean, that is our paradigm. You know, we don't recognize artificial boundaries. If governments around the world wish to put up immigration concepts to say who is an alien and who's not, you know, we don't see the world like that. We are a transnational community and have always been. And when we met to establish the CARICOM Reparations Commission, our legacy was the American reparations movement. I remember reading a 10-point plan by George Foreman. You know, I mean, that was our blueprint. We did not, in the islands, originate a 10-point plan. George Foreman had said, here is a version of a reparations 10-point plan. You know, we have always been infused by each other. The literature on reparations that came out of the United States is a monument. No country has produced as much significant literature on reparations than the United States. And therefore, it was your literary monument that is the heart of what we have been inspired by. Our Caribbean effort is strong, but we do not distinguish in any way the tributaries of our intellectual journey. We are all flown into a mighty river from multiple dimensions, and this is who we are. So, brother, we celebrate you as our intellectual and organizational icon. We thank you for your lifelong dedication and support. You inspire us. We will do our best. And no doubt behind us will be other younger generations that will rise up and continue this work. And so, you know, it is that nature. We will not relent until we have done what we have been called upon to do. Many of us have relied on spiritual guidance, our ancestors to guide us. So when from time to time, one of us dig deep and produce a book that would add information and concepts, because we are inspired. We do not act alone. We are inspired, you know, by our ancestors to make this contribution here, make this contribution there, produce a piece of literature over here, give this speech. And if you don't believe in the spiritual interconnectivity that guides us to do what we have to do, well, then I think you don't understand the nature of what we do. And yes, that meeting, that coming together, Ron, when you brought us together, that was a spiritual moment because it was necessary. It was necessary at that moment for us to come together and break bread and to remember who we are. You know, that Miami airport does not divide us. It's just a conduit. You know, we just pass through there. You come to the islands, you pass through there. It's just a conduit. It's not a border because we've never had that border. I remember doing work on the Haitian Revolution. And when the Haitian government on the Dessalines says that any African person who arrives on the shores of Haiti is free and a citizen, and our people were moving from the United States south through the Bahamas, through the Keys, and heading down to Haiti for citizenship. And our people from the other islands were navigating through the Caribbean archipelago to get to Haiti to have freedom and citizenship. That is what we have always done. We move up and down our land space wherever we have solidarity, and we do what we have to do together. And this is my contribution. And now we are at the stage, Ron, where we need to have strong organizational support across the African continent, because this is a global movement. And now that our African governments are one by one coming on board to join with Global Africa, so that Global Africa can build this mighty organizational and intellectual force. This is where we are now. And I hope that soon we will meet in Africa to have another breaking of bread, Ron. And I know that you will always be at the center of these issues because you fully comprehend what needs to be done. So thank you, my brother. Congratulations on the life that you have been given to live. And thank you for living it the way you have on our behalf. Bless you, my brother, this day. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate those words. And I think people can appreciate by the way you have done that narrative. No one sort of spins the narrative like Professor Sir Hilary Beckles. So that is the de facto reality of the gift that God has given you and moving us forward. We now want to take this occasion to begin to introduce the respective commissioners from NAARC and from CARICOM who have joined us. And so I am going to call on the NAARC commissioners, and of course, for this purposes, it is only to say who you are and your title and where you hail from, because we'll be getting into the actual updates about what's happening in the US shortly thereafter. So I can't see everyone. I'm just going to go down the list and call out names. And when I call you, if you'd be so kind to step forward, that would be helpful. Cam Howard is in the house, I think.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. Thank you, Dr. Beckles and Don and Sir Hilary Brown and everyone who spoke. Cam Howard, U.S., representing the United States Reparations Movement. Shay.
All right. And are you from Chicago, maybe?
I'm in Chicago, that city where you say don't come in the winter.
All right. Robin Ruth Simmons.
Good evening. Very honored to be here. I'm coming from Evanston, Illinois, NAARC Commissioner. I'm also appointed to the Evanston Reparations Commission. Thank you.
All right. Dr. Cheryl Grills.
Thank you. Good evening, family. I am here in Los Angeles. I am a NAARC Commissioner and also a member of the California Reparations Task Force appointed by the Governor of California. And I'm also a past president of the Association of Black Psychologists. Thank you.
Dr. Julianne Malvo. Dr. J.
Here I am. Everyone. I'm Dr. Julianne Malvo. I'm the Dean of the College of Ethnic Studies at Cal State LA. Reporting to me Pan-African Studies, Chicano Latino Studies, and AAAS, Asian American Studies, building a Department of American Indian Studies.
All right, thank you so much. Ajo Ajaka.
Peace and blessings. Good evening, everyone. Ajo Ajaka, independent international consultant based out of Rockville, Maryland.
Dr. Robert Turner. Is Dr. Robert Turner in the house? Maybe he'll be joining us later. Justin Hansford. Justin, are you in the house? I thought I saw you sign in. Justin Hansford. Okay, maybe not. I thought I saw Bill Fletcher in the house. Bill Fletcher?
Yes. Yeah, this is Bill Fletcher. Prince George's County, Maryland, former president of Trans-Africa Forum. Thanks for having me on board.
All righty, let me just go again because I did thought I did see Justin Hansford. Justin, you're not there. Well, if not, is there anyone that I missed who joined, whose name I did not call from the NAARC, from the National African American Reparations Commission?
VP Franklin.
Oh, VP, are you there? Okay.
Yes, I've been here.
All right.
And I'm really happy to be part of this important event. I'm in New Orleans, and all of us were in New Orleans trying to organize for the Reparations Task Force here through the help of Robin Ruth Simmons, Cam Howard, and Dr. Daniels. Very happy to be a part of this evening.
All right. Anyone else that I may have missed? Anyone else? Anyone else that I missed? Okay, we'd like to yield to Professor Beckles for the introduction of our colleagues and comrades from the Caribbean Reparations Commission.
Well, thank you so much, Ron. I am here in New York, passing through, and have to head to an airport in about half an hour or so. But I've been hooking in through my travels through the city, using every technology I have to keep connected. But I really had to be here with you and with all of our colleagues, despite the fact that I'm actually on the move. But Hillary Brown has a better understanding of the CARICOM representation at this time. And I would wish to invite Hillary to please share with our colleagues all of our brothers and sisters who are here from the CARICOM Commission. I would love to see them on screen, but please do that for all of us, Hillary. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. All right, perhaps you could start, in CARICOM, we always like to go alphabetically. So Antigua and Barbuda, is Mr. Dorbreen Omard online?
Yes, I am here, and thanks so much for having me. I'm Dorbreen Omard. I chair the Antigua and Barbuda Reparations Support Commission. I'm also one of the 3 vice chairs of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dorbreen. Welcome. Do we have Dr. Nyambi Hall Campbell-Dean online from the Bahamas?
Good night, everyone. I am Dr. Nyambi Hall Campbell-Dean, chair of the Bahamas National Reparations Commission. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Thank you. Welcome. And do we have the Honorable Trevor Prescott with us from Barbados? I'm not sure if he has joined us yet. If he hasn't, we could move to Dr. Damian Dublin from Dominica.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be at this historic forum. I think it's so necessary that we can use different experiences to come together to realize that we have one objective. I'm the chair of the Dominica Reparations Committee and also a member of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And tremendous opportunity for us to just learn from each other and just share experiences.
Wonderful. Welcome, Dr. Dublin. And we could move now to Grenada if Ambassador Arlie Gill is online. Please introduce yourself. Okay, if we don't have Ambassador Gill, we could move to Jamaica. Is Miss Lolita Davis Mattis here with us? I know she was having a challenge with her link. I don't know if she has joined us yet. Okay, if not, we could move to St. Lucia. That would be Mr. Earl Bousquet.
Good evening, and I'm Earl Bousquet, a journalist and reparations activist, and I was and still am the chair of the St. Lucia National Reparations Committee since its establishment in 2013, and we have served under 3 consecutive administrations, and I'm glad to be in the House.
Thank you and welcome, Mr. Bousquet.
So Dr. Brown, I'm here.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you. Lalita Davis Mattis, and I'm the chair of the Council, National Council of Reparations for Jamaica. And I'm elated to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful, welcome. And I don't know if we have Mr. John Moe Thomas from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I don't know if we have St. Vincent here with us. And actually, I miss St. Kitts and Nevis. So do we have Ms. Carla Astafan, the chair of the St. Kitts and Nevis Reparations Committee? No? Okay, and what about Mr. Armand Zunda from Suriname? Armand Zunda, if you are present. Okay. I would also, though, like to take this opportunity to acknowledge and welcome Ambassador June Suma, who I gather is online, also from St. Lucia, and is also a representative, was elected recently to the UN Permanent Forum of People of African Descent. So congratulations to Dr. Zuma and to Dr. McKay-Creen, both of whom from the region who are on this body. And I believe we do have a representative as well from NAARC, who is also on the UN Permanent Forum. So we really have a very strong representation. So welcome, happy to have you here with us too. I'll turn back over to you, Chair Beckles.
Thank you, Hillary, and hello, colleagues. Good to see you all across the islands and beyond the continent. Good to see you all, and wonderful that you are all here with us, and to wish Ron happy birthday from the islands. You know, I know that Dr. O'Brien is going to want to sing a calypso or one of those fantastic tunes to wish you happy birthday. But God's blessings, brother, from all of us. Well, let's keep on with the work. Let's keep on. Luta continua. So we'd like to now begin with our broader conversation with some updates from both the United States and the Caribbean. I'd like to call on from our U.S. Commission, from NAARC, Cam Howard, Robin Ruth Simmons, and Dr. Cheryl Grills in that order. And these are succinct reports, 3 to 5 minutes, please, to give us an update on HR 40, Cam Howard. 2, Robin Ruth Simmons, to give us an update on Evanston and the municipal reparations movement, and also Dr. V.P. Franklin to give us an update on what's happening with colleges and universities in the U.S. And then finally, to hear from Dr. Cheryl Grills on what's happening with California and with reparations initiatives as it relates to states, because there's a robust movement. So Cam Howard, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. And this will be a report on HR 40, as you stated. We are in unprecedented waters in this country in regards to federal legislation. The federal legislation that we have before us now is HR 40, the Commission to Study Reparation Proposals, Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. That legislation was first introduced in 1989 by Congressman John Conyers. There was a lull in that legislation for about 3 or 4 years. And then at the beginning of 2015, when the National African American Reparations Commission was formed, at our first meeting, HR 40 came up. And we determined that the way that legislation was written at the time, it was obsolete, and that we need a new legislation. And NAARC assembled a team to craft the legislation that we have now. We moved the legislation from a study bill to a remedy bill. And it is the bill that is being debated right now in America. Currently, we are on a trajectory that's entitled HR 40 on the move. Certainly it's not moving as fast as we wanted to move, but certainly it is moving. At the start of this Congress, 117th Congress in January, Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee introduced this bill with 118 original co-sponsors on the first day of Congress. meaning that we only needed to gather 100 more co-sponsors to move this legislation to the floor and have it voted on out of the House. In February of that same year, 1 month later, she had a second historic hearing on HR 40. And in April, the legislation, for the first time in this nearly 30 years of introduction, it passed out of the Judiciary Committee. We subsequently attempted and have worked diligently to get those 100 co-sponsors that are needed for that vote, for that bill to be passed in the House. We currently have about 78 of that 100 who have stated that they will, who have actually signed on as co-sponsors. We have another 21 who stated that if the bill comes to the floor, they will vote on the floor. That gives us 217, which is 99 of the 100 that we needed at the start of the Congress. And with the Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's vote, that one makes it 218. We have the votes necessary to pass this legislation out of Congress. Historic work from a whole, like Dr. Hilary Beckles talked about a network. We have built a network under the leadership of Dr. Ron Daniels, who convened an HR 40 strategy group meeting. We meet every week, and we have met for 80 plus consecutive weeks to move this legislation forward to this point. Again, we are on unprecedented waters when it comes to federal legislation. Not since the Reconstruction has there been federal legislation passed for redress and specifically for people of African descent in this country. We have a ton of allies who have joined this movement. We have the Japanese American movement, Japanese American community. We have the Jewish Reform community. We have the World Conference Against Churches. We have many businesses, national businesses, corporations who have stated HR 40 must be passed. We have institutions that have signed on to this bill. ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, Human Rights Watch, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and NAACP, and other national organizations have signed on to this bill, the National National Action Network and others. We are again at unprecedented times in this country in regards to this legislation. We have also the U.S. Conference on Mayors, U.S. Conference of Mayors in this country, who have signed on to this bill and said that it must be passed. The National Black Caucus of State Legislators have also said HR 40 must be passed. The Atlanta Fed, Federal Reserve Chairman, said that this bill must come to pass, as well as many others in the business and philanthropic community have also joined in efforts to get this legislation passed in this country. The MacArthur Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, and many other large and small foundations have joined on in America, building this network that Sir Dr. Hilary Beckles talked about, building this network here domestically as we move HR 40 forward. We also know that our fearless leader, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who couldn't be here with us, but we know she's out there working on this particular issue, even when she's not here with us. We know that she's having high-level talks to move this legislation forward, not only in Congress, but also at the executive level. We are poised, and we will continue to do the work necessary to bring this legislation into law. We said this is not a time for division. It's not a time to waste. We must seize this time, and we must push forward in these last few months of this congressional session to make this happen. HR 40 on the move.
All right, HR 40 on the move. Thank you so much. Robin Ruth Simmons.
Thank you, Dr. Daniels. In Evanston, Illinois, we in 2019 passed Resolution 126R19, which established the Reparations Committee in Evanston. It allocated the first $10 million of our recreational cannabis sales tax to implement reparations, and the work began, informed by a stakeholder process, community members and the Black community informed, prescribing reparations, what forms would we want to prioritize. That led us to a committee approval and city council approval to begin our redress with housing. So we have begun to actually disperse our first reparation benefits in Evanston, $25,000 direct benefits to build wealth through home equity in Evanston. and we will continue implementing reparation initiatives over the next 10 years minimum. My goal is that future councils will extend this initiative in perpetuity, certainly another 10 years, but hopefully ongoing. The fund has already begun to increase well beyond the $10 million with public and private contributions to the fund. Our faith community has stepped in and has been participating with funding, increasing both the city fund as well as the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston's fund that is led by a Black body of leaders in Evanston. In addition to that, we have our local foundation, the Evanston Community Foundation, that has seeded the Reparations Stakeholder Authority of Evanston and is also expanding the fund for reparations as well as other support. I'm really excited to report that what we've done in Evanston has inspired a movement. An organic coalition of local leaders have begun to introduce and implement reparations initiatives in their own cities appropriate for their own communities. And what we're seeing is it will vary from community to community based on the harm, but for the most part, the harm is the same. Best practices are going to be the same. Stakeholders must lead the work. A budget must be set, and that's happening. There are more than a handful of communities now that have established a fund, a commission. We see work that is happening now at state levels and even at county levels, particularly in the state of Illinois. There is discussion at a county level as well. And we are been meeting, we've been sharing with one another. As Dr. Daniels mentioned earlier, we met in Evanston, about 40 elected leaders, maybe 40 to 60 elected leaders from across the nation met so that we might support one another, share in our partnerships. To date, our partners at the African American Redress Network have mapped the local efforts, and we understand there are about 400 local efforts that are various forms of reparations under the 5 components of reparations, but there are now over 100 local initiatives across the United States of local reparations in the more traditional compensation and restitution forms of reparations. And we continue to see more cities join the movement every day. Ultimately, all of us share the ultimate goal and support of HR 40. I should note that our city, Evanston, Illinois, under the leadership of Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste, who was then an alderman, passed a reparations resolution in 2002. Other cities have done the same, but we stand on that. And so in the spirit of NAARC and NCOBRA, and 2 of my personal mentors that are Evanstonians, Judge Lionel Jean-Baptiste and Dr. Iva Carruthers, we thought we would do what is within our purview as a local government to lead locally while we support and demand reparations for an HR 40 to be passed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we are so proud of the visionary work that Robert New Simmons is doing. The whole world is looking at Evanston and seeing that reparations is possible, that it is actually happening. The question of the size of it is irrelevant. Reparations is reparations. And one of the reasons we exist as a commission and works so closely with CARICOM is so that there can be authoritative voices here who can define and clarify what reparations are and what reparations are not. I'm actually going to go next to Dr. Cheryl Grills and have Dr. B.P. Franklin come after her. Dr. Cheryl Grills, would you please join us at this point? You have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening again, everyone. While I'm a member of the California Reparations Task Force, I want to make sure folks understand that my comments should not be seen as representing the task force, but rather these are my own thoughts, experiences, and summations. So the California Reparations Task Force was formed through Assembly Bill 3121 under the authorship of Secretary Shirley Weber. And it was launched with state legislative approval and the governor's approval that was finalized in September of 2020. We started meeting shortly thereafter. We have 2 years to accomplish several tasks, and our task force will sunset on July 1st, 2023. The charge of the task force is multifold. We are charged with studying and developing reparations proposals for African Americans, with special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the US. We are to look at the periods of enslavement, post-enslavement Jim Crow. We are to look at federal and state laws and other forms of discrimination in the public and private sectors. We are to look at the lingering negative effects of the institution of enslavement. We are to also educate the California public about reparations and the task force's work. We are also to recommend appropriate remedies in consideration of our findings of harms. And there are multiple things within that discussion that we will be dealing with. At the end of the day, we will be identifying, compiling, and synthesizing a corpus of evidentiary documents, and then make recommendations on the forms of compensation that should be awarded. I want to just say that we will be releasing our first report. It is an interim report chronicling the harms from enslavement forward to the present. This report spans 13 chapters, over 600 pages long at this moment, and it covers a variety of topics such as the period of enslavement, racial terror, political disenfranchisement, housing segregation, criminal justice, the wealth gap, mental health, health and public health harms, among others. The report will be released somewhere around the first week of June. Our efforts in California are important, and they're significant because they are the first statewide effort in the United States. At the same time, I'm very clear that this does not replace the need for federal reparations efforts. And so our work, while it's going to be focused on California, I think can share some lessons learned as we progress. We've faced our fair share of challenges that future state, county, and federal efforts going forward could hopefully learn from. These include things like how to navigate what would be state or federal rules. In California, it's the Bagley-Keene Act that essentially makes it very difficult for us as task force members to have a conversation with each other about any task force issue. Everything has to be done in public, so all the sausage making, if you will, is in public. We also are launching our community engagement and communications process, but we're doing that in the context of a lot of bureaucratic complexities that delay timely action. We are garnering a broad cross-section of community input and participation, but thus far we haven't gotten that broad cross-section in the attendance at our task force hearings. We need a broader array of views. A number of Black organizations and community organizers and community-based organizations have yet to really fully get involved. And then a very sad and disconcerting challenge is the vitriol and sometimes loose affiliation with the truth and with facts that appears in public comment at task force hearings, which has multiple negative impacts. We do have some important resources, and I'll end with that because these resources are important to aiding our work. We have a group of task force members that represent diverse areas of expertise and opinions, including 3 elected officials on the task force. We have a slate of at least 10 staff attorneys provided by the California Department of Justice. They have been essential to us completing our work. We have a cross-section of community-based organizations that are conducting community listening sessions across the state to obtain community input on the harms, the forms of reparation, and who should receive reparations. We have resources to travel around the state so that our task force meetings, the ones that are in person, can in fact provide access to different sectors of the state. We have resources that have allowed us to have a team of economists to model and calculate various forms of reparations. We have resources to bring on, and we have already brought on subject matter experts in areas like history and legislation to compile specific information for the task force. And we have subpoena power. and have already started using that to gather relevant records. We have not used it yet to compel testimony, but we are compelling records from the state of California at this moment. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. And let me just also share that California is first, but New York is moving forward. Councilman, former Assemblyman Charles Barron, some of you know him, is pushing forward a reparations initiative in the state of New York, and New Jersey is not far behind, being pushed forward by a series of organizations there. There's some movement in Maryland as well as Delaware. So there are state initiatives that are coming online as well. The final report in this segment, I'd like to turn to Dr. VP Franklin. You have the floor. Colleges.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm really very proud and happy to be honored to be a part of this discussion this evening, and to outline some of the things that we would like to see institutions of higher education engage in order to try to deal with this issue of reparatory justice, since many of these institutions have received their endowments, their funding from participation in slavery and the slave trade. And so this issue was raised initially, and for many across the country, as a result of Georgetown University and the sale of 272 African-American people to Louisiana to relieve the debt for Georgetown University in the 1830s. When this was revealed by the students were among those that pushed this issue, brought it to the fore. And in Louisiana, where I'm located, we organized the descendants of those who had been enslaved into the GW 272 organization and began negotiations with Georgetown University for reparatory justice for those descendants of those who had been enslaved in Louisiana as a result of the sale in the 1830s. Things had developed over a number of years where the university was sort of dragging its feet on it, but the students, again, demonstrated their willingness to tax themselves to pay for reparatory compensation to the descendants of those who had been sold into slavery for the benefit of Georgetown University. Again, the university officials still dragging their feet. There have been some who have been able to prevail upon the university to support their matriculation. That is, some from GU 272 to enroll at the university, to have their tuition paid. And there is this ongoing negotiations about what additional measures will be provided for those who were descendants of those who had been enslaved. Of course, other universities, Brown University, Harvard University, Princeton University, have been engaged in various reparatory justice initiatives. But again, it is necessary that the students at these universities push the administration to enter into negotiations to demonstrate what should be done in terms of reparatory justice for the wealth that it had accumulated as a result of participation in slavery and the slave trade. One of the most recent examples that we have in terms of the university students pushing the university, or in this case, the seminary, to engage in reparatory programs was in Virginia Theological Seminary. And in Virginia Theological Seminary, they have identified those enslaved workers for these seminary. They have identified their descendants who were victimized by enslavement, by Jim Crow, by underemployment, and they have been identified. These families have been identified, and a reparatory justice fund has been created, and the descendants will be receiving annually from Virginia Theological Seminary, the descendants of those who had been working for the seminary for over 150 years, and they've been identified, they will be receiving an annual reparations payment from Virginia Theological Seminary. So these are examples. There are other examples of institutions of higher education that have begun this process. But one of the more interesting developments has been the announcement that Ohio State University would move toward the students entering and graduating from Ohio State University debt-free. And so that this provides an example of how students can mobilize, particularly those students at those schools where the endowments, the wealth can be traced back to slavery and slave trading, to also develop a program at those institutions so that students of African descent graduate from those institutions debt-free. We have an example in terms of Ohio State University where it is not related to reparations, but it can be a situation that serves as a model for students to prevail upon those institutions that receive their endowments from slavery and slave trading to also develop a program so that the descendants of those who have been enslaved by that institution or by their founders, to make sure that those students graduate from those institutions debt-free. There is a model out there, and so we hope that the students at these other institutions will take up this model and move to make sure that in those institutions, students of African descent graduate from those schools debt-free. That's the movement for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. V.P. Franklin. And we have other commissioners, but they'll be joining in the broader conversation that we're going to have after we hear from our comrades and sisters and brothers with the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And I suppose I should turn to Dr. Hillary Brown to facilitate those reports coming from our comrades with the CARICOM Reparations Commission.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Daniels. And thank you to the commissioners, the NAARC commissioners, for those very insightful updates. And really, there's so much more happening than we even know. And so that has been really very helpful to see the ways in which there are successful initiatives happening in California and Evanston and all across the country. Thank you so much. That was really very enlightening. And so what I would do now is first invite Dorbreen Omard to help us to begin to get a sense of what is happening in the reparations movement in the Caribbean. And he will speak to some of the initiatives in Antigua and Barbuda.
Thanks so much, Dr. Brown. The Antigua and Barbuda Reparations Support Commission is a government appointed, it is government supported. We see our role primarily as being one of advocacy. Our messages, our ideology essentially are driven by the dialogues of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, of course, deeply inspired by the writings of Professor Hilary Beckles and many other of our regional and international stalwarts. Our program, our annual program, is structured around 4 or 5
Okay, we're not hearing you, Dorbreen.
Management with youth school programs, the church, voluntary organizations, civic organizations. That's essentially February. In March, we focus on observing the International Day of Remembrance of the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. In May, our work tends to be focused around May, the month of African liberation.
You've dropped out, Darbreen. Okay, is Mr. Omar still on the call? I'm wondering if he has dropped off.
Looks like we have lost him for the time being, so.
A couple of minutes. Okay, well, maybe while we're waiting for him to come back in, I could invite Eric Phillips from Guyana to introduce himself. He was not on this link earlier when we were doing the introduction, so go ahead.
Good evening, reparations family. This is Eric Phillips from Guyana. I'm the chair of the Guyana Reparations Committee and a vice chair of the CARICOM Reparations Commission.
Wonderful, thank you. Welcome, Eric. And what about Carla Astafan from the St. Kitts and Nevis Committee? Okay, I'm not sure if Carla is having difficulty unmuting.
She should be, yeah, but
she should be in.
We should proceed with the others in the meantime.
Okay, and is Darbreen back in? Because if he isn't, then we could move to the next report and perhaps come back to him. All right, so let us go to Dr. Nambi Campbell Haldine, the Bahamas.
Hi. Yeah. Hello.
Yes, we're hearing you.
Greetings. So in the Bahamas, we are really re-implementing our reparations movement as we've been a little stagnant, not in heart, but in terms of governmental support, as we are also a government organized and funded committee. Most of our work has been around really just engaging persons into around what the reparations conversation, what reparations are in the country. We've had a lot of movement around the visit of William and Kate to the country. And so we're really just trying to continue the conversation and keep it moving forward, and also add reparations conversations to the SDG plans, the UN SDG plans, and implement them with instituting a reparations plan for governance in the Bahamas.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you very much, Dr. Campbell, Dr. Hall Campbell-Dean. And I will move now to Lolita Davis-Mattis, Jamaica.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. So the National Council on Reparation in Jamaica was established in 2009 by parliamentary bipartisan consensus. And so we have been operating for quite a while. Over the last 2 years, we have been focusing mostly on strategy. And I'm really happy to hear about HR 40. I've started doing my reading since the brief presentation on HR 40. But what we have been seeking to do is to focus on strategy through the development of a national policy on reparatory justice. The council really has been established to advise the government of Jamaica. And that advice goes through the minister with responsibility for culture, sport, and gender, Olivia Babsy-Grange, Honorable Olivia Babsy-Grange. So she is the minister, an extremely active minister, and participated in our yearly retreat earlier this year. Now, why are we focusing on policy? What we are seeking to do is to say to the government of Jamaica that from the perspective of intergenerational equity, if we are talking about reparatory justice for African descent residing in Jamaica, and we're happy for the dialogue, because I believe, as Professor Sir Hilary Beckles said, he spoke to the notion of one voice. He said, let's talk, it's more action and let's all have one voice. And even though we are in different spaces and we are different states in the US and we are in different sovereign nations in the Caribbean, it's still one voice because we are all one people. And we believe that that should be the thrust of our policy. So we wish to advise the government of Jamaica on the road to reparatory justice. And what we are seeking to do is to establish an intergenerational equitable continuum, whereas in the next couple of years, we know that whatever negotiations take place today, that we are negotiating for our future generations. So we have to be very careful and methodical in how we address these matters. So for example, we're looking at the notion of the policy. We're talking about a public consultation, which we're about to embark on, a national public consultation program, which will take many forms. And I heard my colleague out of California, and she explained her consultation process, which is similar to what we have here. We are backed by finances, not sufficient to do all of the work that we have, but we also know that because of the nexus and the multidisciplinary nature of preparation, that we will get the support and the funding that we need. We also recognize the need, and my colleague also mentioned it, in terms of subject matter experts, because we're looking at that right now. We're looking at matters relating to health. We're looking to economics. We have to engage with the experts in economic theory and practicum, etc. We also need to deal with our own internal reparatory justice issues. And that's a separate issue that we have addressing here. The notion for us with internal reparation is that as a nation, as a country, we must also fix our own internal inequities. And so there are dedicated programs to that. For example, I tell you there are different focus relating to the Rastafari movement, for example, who have over the years been champions of reparatory justice. We're talking about looking at our legislative frameworks that we have. What are some of the laws and the books that perpetuate the kind of injustices that we have in our country? Because these are laws that were brought down to reception because from our colonial, from the colonial countries. We're also talking about, the whole cultural element, global action. How can we not just galvanize support from among ourselves and members of the diaspora, but how do we have reparatory justice for people of African descent as a single global topic? In other words, so of course we understand that there are many discourses going on. There are different international arrangements. There are different declarations, some binding, some not binding. But how do we move the dialogue to a place where it becomes a singular global issue, so that it becomes a singular global call for action for all nation states who have been a part of this transatlantic crime against humanity and human trafficking against people of African descent? I don't want to take up much time, but I'm happy for this forum, and just to say that I certainly will be making contact with some of my colleagues that I've just met online as we move forward in developing our own policy on reparatory justice here in Jamaica. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Lolita. And I really want to endorse your comments about a single mission and a single goal, and to recognize too that a win in any context. So if HR 40 moves through, it is a win for all of us. It sets a precedent. It moves the dialogue forward. It enables all of us to be able to move the case forward. So a win for one is a win for all. And I totally endorse your points about it being a singular mission, singular goal, singular issue. And if we could move then to Earl Bousquet from St. Lucia for his update.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. And we are pleased to have the opportunity to make this presentation today. We were not represented at the session 7 years ago, but we thereafter have always been very proud of the role and the contribution that the CRC and the initiative of the 14 CARICOM governments to make a collective demand for reparations from the United Kingdom and the European Union for reparations for slavery and native genocide. The role and the influence that our initiative has had on the creation of the NAARC and the subsequent evolving effects that have been described earlier, we can only be that much more proud. We have, like all other CARICOM reparations committees at the national level, had to contend with and prepare for the series of royal visits which are currently taking place across the region. We know that the current second leg of the Royal Charm Offensive has not been as charming as the royal family would have liked. And what we are doing in St. Lucia is using the opportunity of the visit to continue what we've been doing for the past 8 years, and that is to enhance advocacy and education and promotion of the reparations message, because we are very clear that the period when our people lined streets and students had to stand by the roadsides waving Union Jacks because of a royal visit, that has long gone. And we know of no such, and we can assure that there is no such activity organized, both because none was organized and also because the royal household did go out of the way to amend the second leg of the visits to ensure that there is no direct face-to-face relationship between the royal couple and the reparations movement. In fact, Grenada was axed from the itinerary, as we all know, even before they left Britain, from the standpoint of the advice of the British Governor General in Grenada and the Grenada government to do what I refer to as cancellation by postponement, because the trip wasn't cancelled but only postponed, is what we have been told by the English handlers. Nonetheless, the royal couple will be operating out of St. Lucia. They arrived today and will be proceeding to St. Vincent and the Grenadines tomorrow, a favorite location for the royal family, particularly the island of Mustique. And they will not be welcomed by Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves of St. Vincent, who is seeking medical attention abroad. And in the case of St. Lucia, what we have been doing is ensuring that we participate in activities during and after the visit to ensure that, like I said, we accentuate the work that we have been doing. So, for example, we will be having 2 live press conferences during and at the end of the stay in St. Lucia, which is for an entire week. The St. Lucia visit will be on the 27th and the 28th. And between now and then, we will also be, as we have been, giving interviews to the mainstream and social media to ensure that we keep the pot boiling. We do also have a 100-day plan from the 1st of May after the royal visit ends until all the way to August to observe emancipation, to observe the birthday of Marcus Garvey, and even to roll into the second Africa African Union and CARICOM Summit. We will also be during that period highlighting the reason why CARICOM is demanding a full and formal apology and not expressions of royal sorrow and regret. We will be drawing attention to the relationship between the royal family and slavery. We will be highlighting the CRC's 10-point plan for reparatory justice. And we will be explaining what the visits really are for in terms of the celebration of the Platinum Jubilee of the Queen of England, who is also the Queen of the Commonwealth, and by virtue of the membership of all of the CARICOM member states of the Commonwealth, she is visiting those that are not or being visited. They are being visited on her behalf. That is those that are no longer, those that are still within the realm. We welcome the opportunity to talk about the difference between independence and republic within the Commonwealth. And we were not invited to any activities, and we did not seek or any audience, even though we welcome the fact of what it led to in Grenada from the standpoint that the mere request for an audience with the royal couple ended up with them deciding to scrub Grenada off the list. In our 8 years across 3 administrations, we've never got a budget. We're looking forward to one this year, and we're keeping our fingers crossed. But despite that, we have been able to do quite a lot, including we pioneered a series of a 1-year series of Caribbean reparations lectures, which were broadcast to every single member state of CARICOM that has a commission, that has a committee, and that had any ability to follow. And it was quite an experience with the participation of the CARICOM Reparations Commission. And of course, we have to make a case, unlike most of our colleagues, against both the United Kingdom and France, because one of the things that St. Lucians love to say is that we were 7 times French and 7 times British. But as our colleague, Dr. June Suma, who is an original founding member of our committee and who is with us tonight, as she has always pointed out, we have to break down that myth. And finally, we want to congratulate Dr. Suma for having been selected by CARICOM to represent the region on the United Nations Permanent Forum for People of African Descent. And we do support the earlier call for everything to be done to see how much we can extend the period of observance and activity to a 2nd decade for people of African descent. Thank you from Castries, St. Lucia.
Thank you so much, Earl. And I think through all the reports, we're seeing the layers and the complexity of the issue that we're dealing with, but also, you know, the unity of purpose across all of the presentations that we have heard. I don't, if Dorbreen has not been able to join us.
I'm back.
You're back? Oh, wonderful. Okay.
I would just essentially like to finish, because I was talking about what our program looked like. And I'm towards the end of the year, October, November, is our participation in our Heroes Day national festivities, and also our independence festivities. The periods between all our events are filled with media programs, primarily radio, of course, television, social media. In our peoples, the understanding of our 10-point plan. We also do spend time sharing with other national commissions, taking part in their programs, inviting them to take part in our programs. We are getting over the last couple of years, we've certainly been appreciating the sort of inroads that I think we have been making as far as reparations thought is concerned. And as Earl just spoke about, we've had fairly decent demonstration of to how our people are reacting to our messages. When we look at the situation around the visit of the royal family to this country, the pushback against that association and the call for reparations, the call to the British government and to the Crown for reparations is particularly strong. This is the strongest I think we have ever felt it here in this country. And so in a way, we have to say thanks for these visits that are going on to the country. Just one last word in closing about my participation in the 2015 meeting. You know, beside being convinced, or for the first time being absorbed in a global community and realizing that we are part of a global moment. One of my highlights was actually sitting next to the Reverend Jeremiah Wright for a number of those sessions. We know how he was, you know, sort of mauled during the Obama elections, and my memory of sitting with him, part of my memories of that meeting, to understand him as a very human person with a sense of humor and who also understood clearly where we were coming from. I thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Doreen. And just before I hand back over to Dr. Daniels, I would give 2 minutes to Eric. Eric, if you want to add a few words and a perspective from the South American continent.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. In Guyana, we've been fully funded since 2015, and we meet every Thursday. Even during COVID, we had Zoom meetings. And that's because we not only have 12 commissioners, we've opened up our meetings to the public. So on a weekly basis, every Thursday, we have about 60 people, mostly from the public, and they drive us in terms of our programs. We have an extensive and diversified program. We have 2 TV programs. As a matter of fact, tonight we did one. We have a youth TV program and we have an adult TV program. We have Ikemba, which is a youth group. They go into the villages, they go into the schools, they have a Sankofa program, and they're very active in terms of re-educating. In terms of how we proceed, we use key holidays to emphasize reparations. So African Holocaust Day, which is October 12th, we go to the beach, we have our faiths involved, the church, and we speak to our ancestors. Emancipation Day, the theme is always about reparations. Black History Month, Kwanzaa. So we center our message around key issues in the African community. Of course, we have many controversial issues in Guyana because of the Indian-African racial mix. We've written a Guyana reparations story. We've written a reparations act for Guyana because we look at internal reparations. But on our TV programs, we try to emphasize the beauty of Africa. We try to decolonize what people think of Africa. We introduce Guyanese to groups such as Mafrika Foda out of South Africa. And most recently, I represented CARICOM in South Africa. We went to speak to the kings and queens. We hope they're visiting Caribbean next year. We know they're going to St. Louis in August. We will support that. And on, we're looking to work with not only members of the Caribbean Reparations Committee, but with NAARC and NAARC and groups in the UK, because this has to be a global effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. Okay.
Excuse me, Hillary, could you give me 2 minutes? I dropped out unexpectedly.
Oh, Damien, yes, please Please go ahead.
Yeah, let me just fully support what has been said by my colleagues, especially the question of the objective of speaking with one voice. At the end of the day, the definition of reparation transcends nations, transcends locality. Reparations is reparations. It's seeking to repair the damages, and the damage has been done in the Caribbean, in America, even within Africa. So our hope is this forum is very important, where we could have this unity, CARICOM perspective, American perspective, and leaning towards the whole African perspective that's coming into play. I just want to quickly, Dominican Reparations Committee was formed in 2014. Our membership is diverse. We have representatives from the Rastafari Movement, Trade Union, National Youth Council. The Kalinago Chief is a member, and representation from community groups. We try to get a wide range of people. We are government appointed, not as much supported as we want to, but because we're into it and we know the significance of reparations, we are doing what we have to do in terms of advocacy. We are pushing the question of naming and renaming, because we think a lot of names of certain places, public spaces and buildings in Dominica still linked to the colonial legacies. So part of our process is to get some of these things renamed after our people who have achieved in various fields. I want to quickly talk about the uniqueness of Dominica, because part of the CARICOM Reparations Commission struggle is for native genocide. We are fortunate to still have a very vibrant Kalinago indigenous community. In fact, in Dominica, they're well represented. There's a member of parliament from the Kalinago territory. They also have what we call a Kalinago Council, which is equivalent to like a local government, which govern their affairs. And they also have a department of Kalinago affairs. So they have these three organizations. And recently, a very important legislation was passed, what we call a fund, Kalinago Development Fund, because the situation with the Kalinagos is they will put on a special, well, I don't want to call it reservation, because it brings to mind the Indian issue in America, where I'll just quickly say, growing up, we used to read about the Indians and the cowboys, and most of the time we were on the side of the cowboys, not realizing that the cowboys were the one who went to take over the Indian lands. So the whole narrative and the stories that's written and presented is all part of the psychological and mental strategy, which is ongoing up to now. So we have to be aware of this, and it's a long struggle, but I think together we have seen progress. We have seen United Nations coming on. Yeah, the decade of the peoples of African descent. So the focus is changing. What I'd really like in closing is just to see that we speak with one voice. We all have different experiences, different cultures. By the end of the day, when we trace back, we'll see there's one link which connects all of us, and together we're going to reach there much faster than everybody fighting within their own realm. So let me just thank the organizers for putting together this kind of activity. And I'm looking forward to this kind of collaboration and exchange of ideas, suggestions as we go on. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Dublin, and for bringing in that dimension of the indigenous people, the native genocide in the Caribbean. Okay, so I will hand back over to you, Dr. Daniels, to take us through the next segment.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Is Sir Hillary still with us, or did he, I know he was traveling and moving in and out.
I think he has already left.
Okay, well, let me say that I want to go back, because we were supposed to hear from Chris. And if Chris is here from Tufts University, I don't want to have not given him an opportunity to deliver a solidarity message. So Chris, are you here?
Yes, I am. Thank you,
Okay,
Dr.
well,
Daniels.
we will yield the floor to you at this point, sir.
Thank you very much. I'll be very brief just to say greetings to everyone. It's such an honor to be with such workers in the movement for generations, for decades and generations. I wanted to appreciate something that Professor Franklin said about the university and note two things. Number one, that universities for so long have been places in which the histories of our people have been erased, and institutionally so. And so I want to appreciate those who are writing the history, have long and continue to write the history of our people into the university space. And I think the reparations movement is strong because of the staying power of academics, including VP Franklin and others on our call. And then also I just wanted to say that the university, in order to really be a reparatory institution, has to get outside of its bounds, outside of its walls, and to actually recognize the experts and the doctors and the professors who don't have the institutionalized degree, but have life degrees in movement building and knowledge creation. And so creating those links between the university and the community and organizers, I think, is essential for our success. So that's what I wanted to say, and thank Brother Don as well for inviting me to be able to share that message. Thank you all.
Would you say a word about your Black Ghost of Empire?
Yes, thank you, brother. Since you mentioned it, I have a book that came out just this week, Black Ghost of Empire. And it is a book that is in service of the reparations movement. And I hope that it will do faithful service. So thank you.
Well, thank you very kindly. Well, what we want to now do is spend a little time with the rest of our commissioners and invited guests, and it will be limited to our commissioners and invited guests. We really only have about another 15 or 20, maybe 20 minutes or so left in our conversation. Let me just say it's been very, very rich. And again, it's very moving, because when I think of Dominica, I think of having been to Dominica from over the years and having spent some time there, and know well of the indigenous people there as well. And of course, one of the highlights of my recent life has been having been invited to Antigua by Dobreen to be a speaker for the Watch Night service there. It was really very, very moving experience. And it says that we have this kind of synergy. I can envision, actually, as I've been thinking about it, just as we have folks coming to the US, who knows, we might be able to pull together a delegation from NAARC and actually do a couple of weeks and just go from island to island and do some interfaces. And that, I think that would be an exciting kind of possibility. Let me just say that there are several questions we want to address. One of them is the question of connecting the Caribbean political leadership with the U.S. Congressional Black Caucus. And let me say that based on the report that Ambassador Commission laid out, and Congresswoman Sheila Jackson-Lee's willingness to engage in that process as well, it seems that that is well underway. And we certainly want, as a part of our joint work between NAARC and the Caribbean and CRC, to be involved with that process. So I don't know that we need to spend much time on that. However, there are three other questions that we would like to just get some comments on. One is the very painful question of examining Africa's role in the European slave trade, and how do we heal the wounds? This is something that comes up periodically. And it's something that our colleague from Jamaica talked about, the internal healing that has to take place. Cam Howard and I are involved in a major initiative around a meeting that will take place in Accra later. And we know that that is one of the questions that is on the agenda, just this healing process that needs to take place. So I'd like to just yield the floor to whomever would just like to comment on ways that we see that might, or recommendations and suggestions about how we might address this issue in terms of the joint work of both NAARC and CRC. So I don't know whether there's anyone who would like to start off, but again,
I could Dr. Daniels, I could give a quick word, a quick perspective, if you allow.
Yes, go right ahead.
Yeah, I just want to tell you that the CRC is well on the button, this one. We have recognized this. This question is a question which serves as a deterrent sometimes, because when it comes out, you have to deal with it. We have recognized that, and that's why this CARICOM Africa Summit is very significant. And also, there'll be a visit being planned for the royals of Africa, and all that was part of the discussion. And part of the objective is to, with the royals coming down, they themselves could put things in perspective and talk about this whole question. It's a question that we really have to face head on. That has been the reality, but at the same time, we have to put it in the proper perspective and not allow it to be used to detract us, because we knew that in Africa, there was always resistance. The resistance was started in Africa. The resistance continued on the slave ships. The resistance continued even when they were landed on the islands. And the resistance continued while they were on the plantations. That's why in Dominica, we have what we call Negmawan is in our local Creole term, but the Maroons. So what it shows is the history of the enslaved Africans has always been a history of resistance. Whether or not what happened in Africa, because of we have to understand that if we put it in perspective and we think of the might of the Europeans coming down with their weapons, descending on probably a small area, a little village in Africa, now have their various tribes. You can understand how difficult it was for probably through the divide and rule mechanism, how they were able to get collaborators on the side. So mindful of that, I think part of the process is engagement. It has started. The Royals visit will be happening. We hope to get one or two in the Caribbean. In fact, for Marcus Garvey's birthday, we're hoping that they could have a small delegation. But they're going to have the big activity in the US. It's planned, it's on, and I think that is a very good
right. Let me just say that we've been having some conversations with Dr. Brown on that matter as well. We have some folks with the Pan-African Unity Dialogue who have done work with the kings and queens for quite some time and are eager to play a part in that process. Earl, I see you, but I want to rotate. I want to ask, is there anyone from I think I see Dr. Malvo's hand on this particular question, and let's be as succinct as we possibly can.
I'm happy for the question to be raised about the relationship with the African continent and about what needs to happen. I think at the same time, we have to be clear, book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, that Africans were victims also. If we look at the 54, 53 sub-Saharan African countries, only about a dozen of them, and I'd have to go back through the numbers. I was talking to someone about it yesterday, but only about a dozen of them are economically sound. Most of them rely on monies from European countries, have done horrible things. Either they have or Europe has done horrible things with their economies. Except for the 10 countries that I have a list of somewhere, 10, 12 countries, the education systems are poor. I mean, the conditions almost mirror some of the conditions that we see in this country for Black people. And I would imagine in the CARICOM areas as well. So while I think, we were sold and there are, actions have consequences, I think that the unity dialogue is important. I think it's equally important for us to be clear about context because we need to be clear about what happened to the African continent and the many ways that there was coercion involved in our enslavement. It wasn't just that Africans sold us. It's much more complex than that. So I'm happy to have the question out there. I think it's important to raise the question and to continue to raise the question. But I'm very reluctant from an economic perspective to say, we throw numbers around about cash reparations is not just about cash. But one of the things that African countries could do, especially those where most of us have come from, West Africa, Cameroon, is to offer us citizenship and citizenship benefits. That will be one of the things that could basically bridge some of the gap and give us the opportunities to know each other, because a lot of this has been about knowing each other. So I could say more, as Dr. Daniels knows, but he also told me to be brief, so I will be uncharacteristically brief.
All right, and we're going to say the same thing to Earl, because we know Earl can bring it as well. So Earl, your succinct comments, sir.
Yes, actually, I wanted to urge that in our efforts to ensure that we measure the speed with which Africa comes on board, that in that process we do not fall into the trap of seeking to get explanations for things that are going to detract from the speed with which we can engage and move forward. And in that regard, I wanted to propose, I don't know if Dr. June Suma is able to join us to give us a perspective on the fact that one of the differences between the last meeting and this one is that CARICOM is represented on the UN Permanent Forum for People of African Descent, and therefore within the context of inadequate global recognition among people of African descent, I'd like if we could spend some time on what how we see us gathering under that umbrella. And I don't know if Dr. Suma can join us.
But I'm not sure I want to. I'm not sure what I would extract from that is that because Justin Hansford from NAARC is also on that body. So what I extract from that is that this body, given representation from both NAARC and CRC, can play an instrumental role in this process, and I would want to record that for the record. I see Ms. Davis.
Yes, Lenita, yes. Thank you. I just want to make a very brief point. And if you look at the chat, you can see that these questions are always being asked. So, you know, my point, the only point I want to make on this topic is whatever avenue we choose to address the issue, that the issue ought to be addressed, and that our young people and other people who are asking the question ought to be given answers to those questions. Because in a real sense, we are also in the space in which we are negotiating on their behalf. And so just to know that whatever it is that we are going to, whatever relationships we're going to forge, however we formulate the argument, that our people who are asking the questions ought to have plausible answers to those questions. Thank you.
Okay, before I move on to the next question, I just want to see whether there's anyone on the NAARC from NAARC who would like to comment before we move on to the next question. Anyone else from NAARC on this question? Anyone else from NAARC? If not, let me do, there are two other questions we want to touch on.
We have a request from Dorbreen.
But we had three comments from the
did you?
CRC side. I was just I'm sure that Dorbreen, I mean, we can also drop it in the chat or whatever. So I think we've exhausted it reasonably well. There are two other questions. One is was also, I think, spoken to by our from representatives from both Dominica as well as from Jamaica in terms of sort of unity, as well as Professor Beckles opening up about the unity of who we are as a movement and how we should see ourselves. But there is this question which is bubbling and does need to be addressed. It certainly is a question in the US. And that is the question of who should receive reparations. And there is, within the US context, a sense that it should be restricted in a way that, quite frankly, would mean that Harry Belafonte or Kwame Ture or Marcus Garvey, who came to the US, that their descendants would not be eligible. And also that the question of the legacies of enslavement. In the US, we have gentrification, we have the Homestead Act, and I dare say that some of similar kinds of circumstances abide in the Caribbean and in other places as well. So I'd like to just open it up for at least a couple of comments on that question in terms of how people see us, because it is going to be a question, and to the degree that there is unanimity and some consensus between NAARC and the Caribbean Reparations Commission on this question, it seems to me that will be edifying and fortifying in terms of how we can provide information for our people. So who would like to take the first opportunity on that question?
I am willing, if you allow.
Go right ahead, yes.
I agree with this. Is a very important question, because that's the question that's been asked. Some ask it innocently, but some ask it seriously. And I think CARICOM's 10-point plan is a very good template, because it's not just about the economic benefit, because it's always difficult. What price can you pay on this level of atrocity that has happened for all these years? CARICOM's 10-point plan actually gives a holistic approach to the whole. So it's more than just the economic aspect, which is important to the question of debt cancellation, but there are key other aspects which are developmental in the perspective in terms of education, access to universities. Basically, what has been missed over the years because of this colonial era, we're trying to repair and get it back. We have done well through our own efforts. Difficulty at the expense of even our own economic development being retarded of providing for our human resource. But what I would propose is we can use CARICOM 10-point plan as a very good basis and see how best maybe both organizations can add value to it and tweak it a bit that we could serve for both. But it's more for us, it's more than just the financial aspect. And in terms of who should get or who shouldn't get, at the end of the day, once you reach that point, you're going to have difficulty to decide whether you're direct descendants of, to me, anybody who has been of African descent, who has been affected or who has played a role, because some people may not have been US citizens, but they have played a pivotal role in the whole development of probably the reparations movement and other aspects that have led to organizations being as strong as they are. So I don't think the aspect of trying to decide who should or who shouldn't should be a factor.
Ron,
Okay.
may I comment?
I wanted to go to Castle Cam Howard's hands next. It's interesting that Cam, I thought our brother was getting ready to lay out the all Black people harmed in America. Well, anyway, Cam, you have the floor.
Yeah, I thought he was going there too. That just shows that, we're united in spirit on this issue. We began we start to address that question from the standpoint of crimes were committed. The transatlantic slave trade, enslavement, apartheid, it was called Jim Crow in America, colonialism, and crimes against humanity. And so the question is, who should be repaired from crimes committed against their humanity, singularly or as a people? The answer is everybody whose crimes were committed against should be able to make the demand and the claim that for repair and for redress. Crimes were committed, injuries suffered, redress is necessary. In the Caribbean, you had the foresight to see or to base your reparations movement on Native genocide as well as enslavement. In America, it's a little bit different. We're fighting solely for Black redress for Blacks in this country for the periods of enslavement for Blacks, for the period of apartheid for Blacks, and for the post-apartheid period of crimes that were committed and are still being committed against our people. And so when we look at who should get reparations, it's those Blacks in America who were harmed in America by America should get redress in America. We know that, as Dr. Dublin was saying, many brothers and sisters came from the Caribbean post-enslavement, but we know that they melded themselves into the Black experience, into Black America after generally one generation. There was no difference in between someone who came from the Caribbean, a generation from when they came, and someone who had ancestry from the plantation. And that's something that is often overlooked, is that we identify as a people in this country based on our collective struggle against white supremacy. And it makes us one people. And we've all been injured in some form or fashion by the crimes of white supremacy. And therefore, anyone who can demonstrate injury, which we all can, even if just on a psychological level, should be able to demand a claim for redress. Anyone harmed in America by America should be prepared by America in America.
All right, very good. Let me know, go to, for short comments before we go quickly to our last question to Eric Phillips and back to our sister Latita Davis. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Ron. We have to be careful because this question is linked to the previous question about who sold whom. We get diverted from the real issue. It was a crime against humanity, slavery was. And when we start separating who should be paid and who shouldn't be paid, we're caught in this self-conflict that defeats us. I'm Guyanese. I was born in Guyana. I married an American of African descent. Do my children qualify? So I think we need to be careful how we shape these questions and how we answer them, because they're traps. They're internal traps to have us divided. Yes, we have to have clarity, but we need not have this take us away from the real issue. A crime was committed. Who committed the crime? Yes, I sold you from Africa, but I didn't make you kill them. I didn't have you rape them. So we have to be very careful, and the two questions are linked.
Okay, Sister Davis.
Yeah, just
I'm sorry, Mathis. I'm sorry, Davis Mathis. I'm sorry.
That's okay. So my comments are a very simple one. This is 2022, and we are advocating for reparatory justice because we consider ourselves to be descendants and victims in some way. In the next 100 years, there are still going to be victims, etc. And therefore, the issue of you can't negotiate to a point where you release the perpetrator from responsibility. So it must be on a continuum. It must be that however the argument is phrased, we look to know that if this earth subsists for another 400 years, then our African descendants will be gone. We'll be the one today who were negotiating on behalf that they can benefit. And I just really wanted to put it in that context.
Okay, thank you very kindly. I want to just quickly spend just a few minutes, and we'll go slightly over as Professor Dr. Brown prepares to do concluding remarks on behalf of Sir Hilary, and then I'll finish off on behalf of NAARC. But this question of how do we, and Professor Beckles talked about it, how do we expand and engage Africa in the global reparations movement? And indeed, how do we in general continue to build a robust reparations movement? And I was struck, Michael, if you're still here, by some terminology that you use, and I would want to invite you back in for a moment to talk about this. From my own perspective, I have argued that on the broader question that there is a contradiction brewing inside of Europe and these various places where we were the rejected stones that were brought into these countries, but we now have the ability to become the contradiction inside of these former colonial powers, allied with other forces that will be beginning to make the demand as well. So that's one aspect of it. And I'm wondering whether when you talked about this, I forget the language you used, whether this third rail or this other component, that this is in part what you had in mind. So I wanted to ask you about that. And then finally, invite people to just give thoughts about how do we continue to consolidate and engage our sisters and brothers on the African continent to build out this reparations movement. So Michael, if you're still there, would you please spend a minute on the first aspect of what I laid out? Is he still there? Michael? Is he still there? Michael? Oh, go ahead, Michael.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Daniels, and good evening again, everyone. So, yes, what the point you raised, I think, is a very important one, is a critical one for the reparations movement, and for the reparations movement to truly become a global movement. And I think one of the ways in which it can become and should become a global reparations movement is to link it to what one may call a third wave of decolonization. The first wave being the anti-colonial movement, the second one being the post-colonial, what I would want to call the first post-colonial decolonial movement in the 1960s and 70s, and in the 70s at the UN level with the call for a new international economic order. And then we had the 80s and so forth, which destroyed all that. And we need to rekindle that fire, and we need a third decolonial wave. We need a third wave of decolonization, because the process of decolonization is far from over, far from it. And what we have and what we got was formal independence, but not substantial independence. And the world order as we know it is deeply colonial. We have a global economy that is deeply colonial in many ways. We have, the causes and the impacts of climate change and climate devastation and environmental destruction is also deeply colonial. And, also at the domestic levels, we still have many colonial hangovers, state structures, educational curriculums, you name it. And, in Europe, of course, we have profound racial discrimination, which is not at all recognized as such. So we need a third wave of decolonization, and to see the reparations movement as a part of that and at the forefront of this. And this is also the way in which we can also link it to climate justice movements, to movements for environmental regeneration and sustainability, link it to issues of international economic justice and a more equitable and democratic international order. And this is something that so-called developing states have been calling for at the UN since the 1970s. Since the 1970s, each year there are resolutions passed by overwhelming majority at the Human Rights Council and at the General Assembly each year, calling for a new international economic order since 1974. And for more than a decade now, each year there's a resolution for an equitable and democratic international order. And these resolutions, although they are passed by overwhelming majority by developing countries, because they are non-binding and they are not supported by the so-called developed world, nothing ever becomes of it. And so we need to, so that is, so that is a few comments on that point. So thanks a lot.
We thank you much. Now, on the issue of, we'll take one more perspective on the whole question of engaging Africa. I'm gonna ask we'll take two. Actually, I wanted to ask if she would not. We have one of our sisters on the commission is a continental African sister, Ajo Ajaka. Ajo, you have any ideas? I know you've been working with the constituency for Africa. I know you've been working on trying to field ways to get more Africans within the diaspora connected. Do you have some thoughts on this matter? Sister Ajo, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Go right ahead.
Yes, as I was stating, Dr. Beckles also mentioned it. I believe utilizing these platforms for continuous engagement, collaborative efforts with the African nations, also partnering with various international organizations. We have African Union as well, who has been very active, and various other African leaders. I know CRC in the past have engaged various African countries such as Botswana and Kenya. So I think this is the time with all that's going on in the US and in the CRC, it's time to continue working with our brothers and sisters on the continent and I believe as well, it is time to also utilize our youth. So also finding various platforms as well to engage and educate our youth on this reparations movement, because they could be utilized so much on the continent and in the US. So I think this is the time just for continuously collaborating. And I believe various participants have mentioned it as well, just communicating, giving people platform to be able to acknowledge what their insights and feelings. So I believe these platforms moving forward with our African nations is going to be very, very helpful.
Thank you. And there are organizations like Africa's Rising and the Friends of the Congo, and there are others who are younger generational led organizations that are moving forward. I saw a hand up. It was Dublin. Was it Dublin? I thought I saw.
Yes, Dr. Daniels.
Well, wait, hold on.
Sorry.
Because okay. I would like, you've spoken several times. I would like to find another voice. If there's one more voice that has not spoken, that would like to speak on this final question of engagement with
Dr. Grill's hand
Dr. Grills. Go ahead, Dr. Grills.
Okay, thank you. I spend a lot of time in Africa, and one of the things that we have to understand is that we're dealing with a colonialized education system. So many of our folks don't understand the history. They don't understand necessarily all of what the reparations are about. And there's a level of consciousness raising that needs to happen. So I think one important strategy will be to work with the students in the universities. I mean, they've just recently, for example, in Ghana and some other countries in West Africa, started to change their curriculum so that it's not anchored toward Europe, but it's rather anchored from the perspective of Africa. I also want to say, and I'm sorry, but I got to leap back to the earlier conversation about who qualifies for reparations. And I simply want to say the elephant in the room for California was that after a very intense discussion and debate in the California Reparations Task Force, in a very close 5-4 vote, the task force voted for lineage-based. Now, there were several reasons that were given for that, but among them was being able to get any reparations recommendations through the legislature, but also that it could withstand the test of the Supreme Court in the US shutting it down because it's race-based, et cetera. We have to understand that an important legacy of enslavement is that Black people, some of us still frame our thinking in what white people will allow. And I think that was part of the challenge that we were dealing with in some of our deliberation. And we've got to figure out how to get past that, because at the end of the day, no matter what we come up with, they're not going to want to see that move forward. So we shouldn't let that decide our strategy and actions. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Anyone else on the CRC side with the final? Anyone from the ACRC side who has not yet spoken? If not, I think we've had a rich conversation.
Dr. D, we do have an additional hand from Dr. Naimba, excuse me.
Yes, okay, let's go there. Yes, my sister.
Good night. I just wanted to kind of speak on the question of who deserves reparations as well. In the chat, I had shared that I have done all of my formal education in the US. So I've spent a lot of time in the US. And a lot of that time, I was the only Caribbean person in a lot of those spaces. And I never distinguished myself and said, oh, well, I'm not African American, so don't put me in the room with the other Black people, right? I was a part of the group. That said, I feel like I understand the need and the desire for specification. Even within the CRC, there have been groups that are asking, well, what about the indentured servants in Caribbean islands, and do they get reparations as well? And so one of the questions is, are we looking at reparations for the crimes against humanity, for slavery? And then also, like, just in terms of how are we defining things? Because even when we say lineage, the majority of Bahamians can trace their lineage back to North Carolina and South Carolina because they came with the Loyalists. So, it complicates things in ways that we really have to expand our notions and our definitions in order to make sure that we're moving towards something that is really beneficial and also sustainable, right? Because you can say, well, it's lineage in this way because that's what's going to work. But then that argument can also be broken down by saying, well, our lineage ties back to you as well. So I just want to say that I understand the need for specification, but also that we have to work together because there's always ways that we can be separated.
Let me just say in a clarifying way, in terms of what I stated earlier, is I think the first thing we have to be clear about is that reparations indeed is for enslavement, but it is not limited to enslavement. Let me say that again. It is for enslavement, but it is not limited to enslavement. In the US context, there was the legacies of African people being excluded from the Homestead Act, from the GI Bill, from the Federal Housing Administration Act, and the war on drugs. We just had a brother from, I think, the Congo, I may be wrong, essentially executed in Lansing, Michigan, I think. I may be mistaken there. It's sort of that's sort of
Grand Rapids. Grand Rapids. From the Congo, yes.
But the point is that, as Malcolm put it, they didn't ask Abner Louima whether he was from Haiti or not, nor did they ask Amadou Diallo whether he was from Guinea or not. Malcolm said, we all catch hell for the same reasons. We all catch hell because we're Black people. Now, inside of that, yeah, there may be discussions about how we eventually talk about various levels of benefits. But earlier, our comrade from Dominica pointed to CARICOM's 10-point program. Well, similarly, NAARC's 10-point programs takes a similar approach, both direct benefits, but also community benefits that accrue to the entire community. Because there's also the question of the underdevelopment of our communities, so that people who are arriving here are coming to communities that have been decimated, have been underdeveloped. And they're not responsible for that. That has, in some ways, has nothing to do with lineage. It has to do with we be Black people. And it's been targeted, as Black people per se. So I think the time that we're spending on this is good, because I think we really do need to have these discussions. It is a fair question, by the way. One of the problems that has been enunciated, and our sister Dr. Grills pointed it out, is it must be a civil debate, however. It must be a civil debate in which we talk to each other as human beings respectfully, and not in some of the very vile and derogatory ways that often is being put forth by some of the people who not all, but some who advocate the lineage-based approach. We're going to go to Doreen, and you're going to be the last one before we go to Hillary Brown.
Thanks so much. I think, we in the small islands need to learn a little more about the complications that you face in the United States as far as this issue as to who gets reparations and who doesn't. We do not feel particularly challenged in the region to deal with that question, because what we have proposed is a developmental plan that really provides benefits to all persons within the nation. In many ways, it may be questioned as to whether we are really talking reparations. If we have descendants of enslavers in the country, let's say, who will benefit from reparations, let's say, to the education system or to the health system, because of how we have structured that. We really have not spent much time, although there are voices among us talking about a sort of individual reparations, X amount of dollars per person, depending on this and depending on this. But I do not think that that particular approach has really taken hold among us. And we are very, very committed to the concepts of the development plan. And just one other comment I wanted to make about this whole question of Africans us reparations also, who enslaved whom, who sold whom. I think there's just need to really dig further into the history. There is enough historical data, enough historical work that helps to explain the complications on the continent during this whole enslavement period. One of the problems I think we have is that we have always seen ourselves as victims. And there are such glorious stories about resistance to enslavement, resistance to the attempt to conquer Africa, that we do not spend time analyzing and certainly spreading. I really think that there is enough for us to deal with the resistance that was on the continent, to sort of counter the sense that we were just picked up and sold.
All right. Okay. All right. What a vigorous conversation. I now yield to Dr. Hillary Brown for concluding remarks. And we thank you for helping to facilitate and help to organize. And, we did some strategizing about how to pull this off, and we pulled it off. So we want to give you an opportunity to share your thoughts as we conclude.
Thank you so much, Ron. And on that very powerful note, that last powerful statement from Doreen, I have to say that I think all of us would feel coming out of this that we really need more of these conversations, and that each of the questions that you posed, we could have spent the entire evening discussing each one. And maybe we do need to, as one of our follow-up activities, really plan to have a deeper engagement on each of those issues. And I know you had mentioned at some point that that IBW would be having a State of the Black World conference maybe later this year. And so perhaps that might be one of those opportunities for us to go deeper and to have more public dialogue on these matters. But I think some of the themes that were coming through very clearly to me were, first of all, making good use of the platforms that we have available to us. And so the commissioners that we have, the representatives on the UN Permanent Forum for People of African Descent, we need to leverage that. We need to leverage the connections that we have with the US Congressional Black Caucus and strengthen that link with Prime Minister Mockley and the Caribbean Caucus. And so I think that is one strong takeaway for me. Secondly, on the matter of the Africa issue and who gets paid. I think what's coming through very clearly to me too is that we have to be very careful about giving the impression that there's division among us, because we know that a big part of why we get so much pushback on our reparations claim is because there is a feeling, one, that Black people are not deserving of this kind of payout or any attention at all. And so there is the absence of that political will to move this forward. So, and they're actually counting on us to be divided and not to be able to bring our case in a unified way. And so I want to really, again, another takeaway is that push for a unified approach, bringing in Africa, the US, the Caribbean, the Americas, and ensure that we have that unified front. We all experience, we all suffer from that ideology of racism, regardless of our class and our education. And this is about upliftment and correcting the wrongs and addressing the crime against humanity, against Africans everywhere. And I think we always need to keep that in mind, even as we recognize that the issue is complex and nuanced. And I think too that the youth theme came very clearly through to me as well, that we really need to redouble our efforts on the youth engagement. It is true to say that there can be no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. You don't have a mass movement until you have the young people on board. And so I think NAARC and CRC and the connections that we have in Africa, that we need to redouble our efforts and see what are some of the actions we can really take to scale that up. So I think that based on that, those were some of the main points I wanted to raise. I think that this has really been a very rich, very insightful discussion. In a lot of ways, we have only just hit the surface. There's a lot more that we can go into. And so I want to thank you again, Dr. Daniels, for convening, for inviting me to participate and to collaborate in bringing this forum to fruition, to thank all of the commissioners who have contributed the depth of their knowledge and experience and expertise to this dialogue, and to our specially invited guests who brought solidarity greetings. I really want to thank everybody. It really has been very rich, and I'm looking forward to when we can do so again, and to offer regrets on behalf of Professor Beckles. We know he would have loved to have stayed to the end and, you know, infuse this forum with his wisdom and his guidance, but he was unable to stay, and he sent me a message and asked me to offer his apologies. So thank you very much. This was indeed rich.
Well, thank you very much. And we appreciate the tremendous load and weight that Professor Hilary Beckles bears, and with his great gifts that he shares selflessly with us as he works indefatigably on behalf of the cause. I too want to thank everyone for joining us in this very, very vigorous conversation. It's been very insightful. It's been very inspirational. It's been good to look back and to reflect on the historical conference, the milestone that we had 7 years ago, and the kind of injection and infusion of education, inspiration, and action that emanated from that. We certainly have advanced, and we are advancing, but yet we have critical questions to address. But quite frankly, the ancestors are dancing because we're at a place where many of us thought that we would not be at this stage. We are in fact, the reparations movement is exploding. It is surging all across the United States, the Caribbean, and throughout the world. It is moving in a way that terrifies those who, and the ancestors of those who colonized us and enslaved us, and who still would wish to do so. And of course, the way in which the royal visit is being challenged currently is a manifestation of our utter determination that we, in fact, will never, ever surrender in relationship to fighting for our ancestors who are crying out for vindication, validation for the suffering and the resiliency and the resistance that they put forth to propel us to this moment in history. We owe it to them to finish the course. And that course will be, as our sister from Jamaica said, it will be this has been a cross-generational struggle to bring us to this point, and it will continue to be so. As Martin Luther King said, I may not get there with you, but we know that our people will get to the promised land of the fulfillment of reparatory justice. And so we have an agenda to work on. We have items that we still need to dig more deeply on. The consolidation of those political relationships between the Congressional Black Caucus and political leaders across the US and throughout the diaspora. Continuing to look at examining the role of the European slave trade and how we heal the wounds and how do we study it more deeply so that it does not become divisive, but that we confront it. It is one of the rules of the MIAFA is that we have to, the Sankofa is to go back, is to examine and then therefore to be propelled forward. To look at this question of how we address who should receive reparations, and our utter determination that we are going to expand and enhance and grow the reparations movement to an irresistible force. And it is already becoming such. And so as Dr. Brown referenced, we in the Institute of the Black World 21st Century are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century. In fact, it was founded on April 26th in 2002 on my birthday. So this coming Tuesday, we will have a virtual celebration and reflections that you're all invited to. But part of that will be to also talk about African Liberation Day. It will also be talking about the Gary National Black Political Convention. It'll be talking about many of the robust movements that have developed over this period. And we see the culmination of this year of celebrating the growth and development of the Institute of the Black World 21st Century, which reparations has been an integral part of, and your work with us has been a part of, culminating in the State of the Black World Conference 5 in November. We are still sorting out the specific date. It'll be after one of the most consequential elections in these United States of America, the midterm elections, where the white nationalists and who are on the rise in this country and across the world to see exactly what will be the outcome in this very consequential election as it relates to not only Black America, but the Pan-African world. And we will have a total track that will be devoted to the issue of reparatory justice. And we'll be inviting all of you to participate in that. So we'll have 4 or 5 days to have a deep and deliberate and consequential dive in figuring out how we forge the kind of relationships that will have us collaboratively moving forward in the 21st century to, in fact, make the prophetic voice of Dr. Hilary Beckles true, that indeed reparations will be the human rights issue of the 21st century. So we thank you for joining us. And we say, as we have always said for the past generations and introducing it to this generation, Aluta Continua, Aluta Continua, Aluta Continua, but also in the Caribbean context, forward ever, backward never. Good evening, and thank you so much for participating in this virtual dialogue between the National African American Reparations Commission and the CARICOM Reparations Commission. Give yourself a harambe. Let us all pull together a collective harambe. Let us all pull together and give yourselves a collective round of applause for such an incredible evening together.
Night.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Night all.